you to advance. Okay, I'm Enid Elliott, and pleased to welcome you to Advancing Early Childhood Education Outdoors Now. To start in a good way, I would like to introduce Musqueam Representative Morgan Guerin, who's a member of Chief Council and part of the Fisheries Department, who will offer a Musqueam welcome to begin our roundtable with good hearts and good minds. I turn it over to you, Morgan.
Musqueam, dear friends and relatives. My name is Morgan Guerin. My ancestral name is Kate Smolina, coming from my relatives, actually from my great-great-grandmother in Washington State, in the Lummi tribe, showing our connections far and wide. It's my honor to be here this morning to provide a few words of welcome to the territory. Now, this always seems interesting because you're sitting there in your living rooms, and from what I'm gathering, all over the world in a way. But the program that we would be delivering would be, of course, in UBC, which is, I wouldn't even say the backyard of Musqueam, but actually its living room. It's home to many of our old villages. It's adjacent to the village that I'm sitting in right now. So I'm very happy to be here to virtually welcome everyone to the territory and offer a few words of welcome today. It's an ancient protocol, and especially in this morning, coming from a program that's would be delivered in UBC if we were all together, not somewhat. Our old village of Cullahan would overlook the foreshore or over to the ocean, and we would see visitors coming in far and wide. And we would dispatch a group of warriors to meet the people that were coming in and ascertain if they had a good heart, if they were coming in peace, and it was just as important what work they had to do today. So if they found that everyone came in peace, you'd be allowed in. So in this case, everyone looks peaceful. And if not, I guess one of the hosts can drop all of you. But I also see that you come with a good work to do today, and one that's very important. The role of a teacher, the role of one who takes the past as a gift to give to the future, to pass those teachings on, and sometimes not just the lessons of things to be learned, but how to learn, is a very sacred role indeed. We call Snowyeth, our teachings. When we say that word in our longhouses, it carries the importance of something that is sacred, something that needs to be heard. And when I heard that that this was a series which really has a focus on outdoors programs, it was very important to me that we speak a little bit about that this morning as well. Understanding that with our people, the outdoors is the classroom, and always has and always will be. We're taught that we belong to Mother Earth. That's actually how we refer to our people. Huamu means you belong to the earth. Like a child belongs to their mother. So when you're out there holding your hand with your mother in those areas, understanding who she is. And with that sense of place, if you have a teaching that you're passing along, especially with ourselves who pass everything along with an oral tradition, not written down, it's very important, that sense of place, because it fires that amount of memory, and it also helps all those memories sort of stay. It really builds that sort of root memory, I guess it were. And I always laugh because if anyone doubts that, if anyone's driven around with an uncle who works in construction and he goes, I remember working on that building, I remember work, is much akin to when I drive past certain areas and go, that's where my grandma said, that's where my grandpa said, that's where my auntie said, that's where my uncle said. And then I find myself giving that to the next generation. And regardless, things that we learn a lecture, we probably remember about 5% of it 10 years down the road, if we're lucky. But when you have something that you do in those outdoor space, you sure remember a lot more for many, many years to come. So it's always been a sense of place is so very sacred in the transition of those teachings from one generation to the next. So I find myself this morning happy to welcome everyone here today. It was my great grandpa, Musqueam Chief, who welcomed the first European sails to these shores. So it's my honor to carry on in his footsteps this morning, albeit virtually, but I'm almost literally standing on the same spot that he did it at. So my house is here now. So that said, on behalf of the Musqueam people, I welcome you to our traditional and unceded territory. I welcome you with a big heart this morning, and I encourage you to keep an open heart and an open mind to be Nutsamat. One more teaching is we're taught when we come into a big house that there's a nail on the outside. And you hang up everything you thought you knew on that nail first, so you can walk into the house. And then together you come forward with a new consensus, a happy consensus. And you walk away with what you know to be true together. And it's up to you whether you want to pick up what you thought you knew on the nail outside. If not, just leave it there. 4 days, it's gone. That's the way they talk. 4 days. So that said, on behalf of the Musqueam people, I welcome you to our territory. Raichka.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm speaking on Lekwungen speaking people's territory, Esquimalt and Songhees, where the land has been cared for and honored and loved for thousands of years. Currently, I'm an early childhood educator at Camosun College in Victoria, British Columbia. I am part of a small group that's been working on this project for almost a year now. Shelley McClure from Island Health, Iris Berger and Hartley Vanek, both from UBC, Belva Stone Cole, who runs an outdoor preschool in Vancouver, Kaylee Hershey, and a graduate student at UBC, and Mariana Brusoni, also from UBC, joined our group to spearhead our roundtables, an inspired and inspiring group to work with. As the title suggests, we feel strongly that now is the time to discuss the possibilities of licensing early childhood outdoor programs in BC for a variety of reasons, which I hope will become apparent to you as you listen to a wide range of experts in this roundtable and the subsequent 2 roundtables held at the same time on the next 2 Thursdays. Our current concerns for the safety of our children during this pandemic has made this issue even more critical. Outdoors is a safe place to be. But I hope you will begin to imagine a more expanded vision of education, as well as opportunities for our communities to include land, water, and air, as we encourage all of us to listen to the wind in the trees, smell the rain, feel the sun on our heads, and really see the place we are in. Through my research with children outdoors, particularly the nature kindergarten in the school district, I have seen the power and benefit of the living, breathing world for the well-being and learning of young children. Outdoor programs for young children have existed successfully for over 40 years in Northern Europe. And while we do have some outdoor programs currently running in BC, only a few of them are licensed. And the problem is that there must be a building that meets a set of standards, while outdoor programs demand a different set of criteria. If programs are not licensed, there's no oversight with at least minimal standards. Without licensing, parents cannot receive government subsidy for fees. As a result, these programs are only available to those who can afford them. During this pandemic, we are being urged to head outside with children as much as possible. It is time to accelerate a community discussion about what early childhood education outdoors looks like in each of our communities and how it might be done in a thoughtful, caring, as well as safe manner. We have been helped in this project first by the Lawson Foundation, Island Health, Camosun College, and finally the Peter Wall Institute for these roundtables. Thank you. We have asked Ellen Kelsey, our facilitator, to help our speakers keep careful track of time. You know now, I think everyone heard, that the session is being recorded. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Stanwick, Vice President, Population Health and Chief Medical Health Officer, who has encouraged us to move this dialogue forward. Dr. Stanwick.
Good morning. And I too come from the traditional lands of the Algonquin-speaking people, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees, basically First Nations, and welcome to all. I always worry following Enid that I've just crossed out half of what I was going to say, and she said so much more eloquently. I feel humbled by first the introduction by Morgan, and then Enid being so wonderfully succinct in terms of thanking all of the people who've carried this forward in terms of recognizing the importance of this particular opportunity. And I also want to extend a heartfelt thanks to all of our panelists and speakers who are able to bring this amazing perspective and share their knowledge as to what they've been able to accomplish in terms of moving early childhood, basically daycare and education forward. In terms of my pulling this together, the other factor was, of course, the call of the election. And as somebody who is an employee of the health authority, I have to be extremely careful and not be seen as advocating for anything specific or telling the government what to do. Apparently that would not be healthy for my career. But at this point, I think more importantly, we're concerned about the health of our, basically the individuals that we have been charged with in terms of being fortunate enough to work with, and that is with children. I'm going to reveal my first bias is that I started my medical career as a pediatrician, and it was later that just a few years later that I acquired my public health skills, and feel that it's a good melding of perspective on how to influence populations of children. And while I've certainly cared for a lot of children with illnesses and certainly sickness, in my public health role, I've seen the consequences of failure to deal with issues in childhood in terms of how it affects adults and certainly all the way into people's latest years in terms of the elderly and even just life expectancy overall. And that does reflect that population health component of my role with Island Health. In looking at approaching this whole subject, it's almost with dividing into pre-COVID and COVID in terms of speaking to some of the challenges. The idea of getting children physically active, and just reflecting back that, I think Morgan's wonderful introduction reminded us perhaps that all of our relatives 20,000 years ago were hunters and gatherers, that we all come from basically a group of individuals who spent most of their day very active, looking for food, on the move. And in 20,000 years, which is a blink of an eye in terms of genetics, have gone to, and I hate to say it, I've probably spent more time in this chair with Zoom than I've ever had. I guess the real major concern is that prior to COVID, we knew that children's activity levels are dropping. I personally participated in the Canadian Pediatric Society statement on decreasing screen time and using it intelligently, recognizing that so much, the roots of chronic disease are very much founded in childhood. And this phenomena of recognizing that some of the best habits are formed early, we've actually moved away from encouraging that. We've seen rises in obesity rates that start in childhood. The rates of childhood obesity pre-COVID were increasing. And so this idea of increasing levels of activity was something that was very much being embraced and recognized and trying to move forward and finds ways to basically get children active, to recognize, and as we've heard already so eloquently from Edith, and we're going to hear from some amazing speakers about how that can be accomplished in terms of being outside, experiencing nature, reconnecting, and in some ways getting back to our roots. The other piece that I think that I just want to emphasize is this phenomena of what's happened with COVID. We do have some early data from your story. Actually, we've got Kate on the line, but this is a BC CDC initiative where we looked at Your Story, Our Future. While it was mainly speaking to people over the age of 18, that data probably can be extrapolated back to younger ages, where only 20% of the population actually increased its physical activity. The majority of people have become even more sedentary, and one really worries, and we need to find out exactly what's happened to children's patterns of activity. Children have been out of daycare. We've seen daycares close, so that I would actually be even more anxious about understanding what have we done to activity levels with children, where parents are at home, but are they actually engaging in those outdoor activities, or are we seeing more and more screen time where it is at least an attractive distraction rather than having to deal with things? So this morning and through the rest of this wonderful assembly of talented people who I'm going to try to at least listen to as much as I can as I pop in and out because of other meetings, to come to an appreciation of how can we assemble a body of knowledge that will make that compelling case, as Enid has said, building on the success of what we've seen in Souk in terms of the wilderness or the nature kindergarten, to have that happen in daycare, and how can this be accomplished in the most effective way, recognizing the extreme value of daycare. I'm just going to share one little anecdote. Prior to coming here, I'm certainly a Manitoban. I did practice pediatrics right up until coming to Victoria in an inner city clinic, and one of the best prescriptions that I ever wrote was for daycare. It drove social services crazy. They said, well, you can only write prescriptions for penicillin. I said, no. I said, if you really want to make a difference in the lives of children, and really these kids, what they brought home sometimes from the daycare helped the parents as much as it was helping the children. So I understand and fully commit to the whole concept of quality daycare, but that spectrum of activities, the options that we want to expand, I think today is going to contribute to us recognizing that there's a valuable opportunity to expand that repertoire, and really look forward to hearing from everyone. And again, an exceptional thanks to Enid Elliott and Shali McClure for basically being the real movers and shakers. When I met with them, I wouldn't say that you shouldn't stand in their way, but all I can say is when they get enthusiastic, things happen. And I just tip my hat to everyone who's made this happen this morning. And I haven't received the warning that I've gone over time, but I think people would rather hear from the speakers than myself, and that includes me. So thank you, everyone, and wishing everybody a great day and a fantastic gathering.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanwick. That was wonderful. What a great way to start us off this morning. So I have the pleasure, my name is Ellen Kelsey, and I have the pleasure of introducing our panel. We have given our panelists a very big job. We have people coming from 4 quite different perspectives with huge bodies of expertise and knowledge, and of course only 5 minutes each to share some ideas with us that are quite pertinent. On our panel today is Helen Dodd, who is a professor of child psychology at the University of Reading, coming to us from the UK. We have Henry Mathias, who is the head of professional standards and practice at the Care Inspectorate in Scotland. We have Carie Green, who is an associate professor at the School of Education at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. And closer to home, we have Kate Smolina, who is the director at the Observatory for Population and Public Health, BC. What I'm going to do is, I think, start with the person who I think is coming from the farthest away, which is Helen. And to start off, ask Helen this question, which is the same question I'll be asking of all 4 of our panelists. Helen, what 3 key insights could you share to make a case for what outdoor early childhood looks like in your context and why it's needed in this time of COVID-19?
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I'm not going to spend too much time saying thank yous because I've only got 5 minutes, so I need to crack on. So I'm going to focus more on the why. Because I'm a child psychologist, my focus is on children's mental health. So I'd like to talk to you about why we want children to be outdoors and the benefits for children of being outdoors. So I'm going to make 3 points as requested. The first is going to ask you to draw on your common sense and your understanding of our connection to nature. The second is going to present some science, and the third is going to put it in the context of COVID-19. So let's start with some common sense. Each of you who's listening, I want you to have a look around you, have a think about what the rest of your home looks like. How many of you can see nature out of a window, picture on your wall, maybe your curtains, maybe your bed covers, maybe your wallpaper? We surround ourselves with nature, and it's intuitive to us that nature makes us feel good. We want to have windows, we want to see trees. When someone's having a rough time, we say to them, why don't you go outside, take a walk, calm down, you'll feel a bit better. This is so intuitive to us that we don't even think about it, we just do it. And I only realised when I was preparing for this that my house is full of pictures of nature, including 2 beautiful pictures in my kitchen, which were taken in British Columbia. So thank you for that. So then let's talk about the evidence. So what do we know about being outdoors, being in nature, and our mental health? So we know from research when we visit nature, that's associated with decreased stress. We know that children who live in environments with high levels of green space are less likely to develop psychiatric disorders. We know that when we change school playgrounds to make them greener, to fill them with nature, they encourage more complex and diverse play in children. They promote longer duration of play. There's increases in physical activity, and children's attention is improved. We know that even viewing nature, so showing people pictures of nature, reduces their physiological markers of stress. So things like their blood pressure, their heart rate, all goes down because nature makes us feel calm and it makes us feel well. And spending time in nature for children leads to improvements in their mental health and in their ability to regulate their emotion. So nature and being outdoors offers a range of benefits in terms of stress and well-being and mental health. So why wouldn't we want children to be in that environment as much as possible? And then the third point is about the context that we find ourselves in now. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like in Canada at the moment, but in the UK, children primarily have just spent 6 months at home. Over 40,000 people have died, and rates are going up again. Things haven't been great. There's a lot of concern about space. How do we keep children apart? How do we stop infection from spreading? When we're indoors, that's more likely to happen than when we're outdoors. Most schools have got more space outdoors that they're not using than they've got indoors in the classroom. So thinking about early years, thinking about at school, why don't we make the most of that space, given what we know about the benefits of being outdoors for children's mental health? And because right now that presents a solution to some of the problems that we face in terms of the spread of the virus. And of course, we know in terms of how much the virus spreads, it's much less likely to be spread outdoors. So it's great for children to be outdoors, it's great for children to be exposed to nature anyway, and in the current context, when they're feeling perhaps more anxious than they might normally be feeling because of all the changes and everything that's going on around them, this is the perfect time to get them outdoors, and it decreases the risks that COVID presents. So we should get them outdoors and we should educate them outdoors.
Thank you so much, Helen. I really appreciate that.
If I was okay time-wise, I didn't.
You were spectacular time-wise. Very, very good. Thank you for setting such a high bar. Henry, may I move over to you with the same question?
You certainly can. Hi, and welcome from Scotland. Afternoon here, and the whole country, I think, holds its breath as we enter semi-lockdown is probably the best way of describing it. Second wave here, and I mean, much dread, I think it has to be said, as we approach winter months. Compared to the first lockdown, obviously, that wonderful spring weather that we had here. So yeah, my name's Henry Mathias, and I work for an organisation called the Care Inspectorate. It's the the Scottish government. We have devolution in the UK, and the Care Inspectorate is the Scottish government's department responsible for licensing all care services for all age ranges, and that includes children's services. I started off looking after and getting a thorough education from being full-time dad, and then worked as an early learning and childcare practitioner. And cut a long story short, I ended up as a preschool advisor and then an inspector of early years services. And I wanted to just briefly share the story of my journey as a regulator, and particularly around outdoor play. I was presented when I first started as a job as an inspector with a very prescriptive list of inputs. And as Enid said, I think it was all premises based, very, very prescriptive. And it didn't really allow for forest kindergartens. And when we had our first application from a forest kindergarten, the response was full of concern, and we essentially refused that application. There was no premises, there was no hot running water, and in terms of my checklist, most of it didn't fit. And we wondered, my goodness, how come in the rest of Europe, and particularly in countries in Scandinavia, in Germany, how come they've got a rich tradition of forest kindergartens? How do they allow that? And it caused us to look in much more detail, and I think to question some of the health advice that we had been following in terms of the risk of infection control of people, of children being outside and not having access to the normal premises that you would expect. And we recognized that children benefited a lot more from those risks than being protected completely indoors and being wrapped in cotton wool, that children flourished in forest kindergartens, and indeed some children who didn't do well in an indoor formal setting that we're all used to, those programs, some of them flourished in a way outdoors that was not possible indoors. Something different happened, particularly those children who struggled maybe in formal teaching setups, in maybe some groups. And something different happened in forest kindergartens, and we were anxious to capture that. So to cut a long story short, we went from a position of refusing forest kindergartens as the government regulator to encouraging them and positively supporting their development. So now we've got quite a good range of nature kindergartens, children all day outside. They will have a shelter, but they will certainly not have a nursery building. And Scottish Government and ourselves in the Care Inspectorate supporting that move. It required us to let go of some of the very prescriptive inputs. It required us to adopt, as Helen was saying, much more of the benefits, to talk about outcomes for children, much more than prescriptive inputs regarding policies, procedures, and premises. And there was a relaxation of some of the style of inspection as well. The inspection was very formal. It was about catching people out. Some people were calling it the policing of childcare, rather than a supportive, advisory, and helpful position. So we adopted a different style with which we regulated services. I'm having a feather waved at me, so I will stop very soon. I just wanted to touch on one other issue, in that we looked at the tradition of childcare and recognized that some of the earliest nurseries were based on open kindergartens, on what were called child gardens at the turn of the 20th century, and tapping into some of those rich traditions. And I would really refer to Morgan here and the First Nation tradition of recognizing the value of nature. And we have similar stuff with the Gaelic tradition, much richer appreciation of the power of nature as a teacher. On that note, I'll say thanks very much and speak to you in a bit.
Thank you so much, Henry. Carie, may I invite you to answer the same question?
Good morning. Today I will share 3 key insights from my research and work to make the case for why early childhood education is urgently needed in the wake of COVID-19. First, I want to discuss with you observations of children's fear and anxiety in natural settings. Second, I will discuss the implications of too much technology in children's lives and its hindrance on children's connections with nature, especially during COVID-19. Third, as a message of hope and resiliency, I will share an observation of a 4-year-old Alaska Native child's deep connection with the land. Over the past 6 years, I have facilitated a number of participatory research projects aimed at exploring Alaskan rural and non-rural children's environmental identity development. I use wearable cameras to explore children's emotional and behavioral interactions with others in the living world. My research findings have revealed stark differences in children's interactions. Fearful emotions and behaviors have emerged more frequently in interactions among children from an Alaskan city. During a field trip to a forest, a group of preschool children took the opportunity to explore off-trail, but for some, this evoked anxiety. I'm going to share with you a vignette from Garrett's wearable camera revealing his discomfort. Garrett proceeded cautiously over and around downed trees. He moved more slowly than his peers. It was difficult for him to keep up, and he was eventually left alone to navigate the fallen leaves. Garrett held his arms out in front of him, balancing carefully as he took large steps over loose and slippery branches. His heavy breathing became audible on the camera. He sighed and grunted often. He tripped and fell over a log, verbalizing only a quiet ow. Although not verbally stated, Garrett's behavior suggested his anxiety and uncertainty as he navigated through the forest. His discomfort was even more telling when, in a few minutes later, he chose not to join his groups of peers as they investigated off-trail. "I don't want to go in there," Garrett said. "Why not?" a parent asked. "'Cause I want to stay out here." In the next example, I argue that video games and screen times implicate the way children learn how to relate with others in their environment. As part of my research, I invite families to participate in a family nature tour where they choose both the location and activities. I arranged to meet Christopher's family at their home and go outdoors on a bike ride. When I arrived, Christopher was playing a video game on the TV in the living room. He told me to go away, refusing to shut off the game and go outside. After much convincing, he finally consented. And I will again show a vignette from Christopher's tour. Christopher vocalized his aggression towards birds through the paved streets of the neighborhood with his mother walking beside him. "I see a little birdie," Christopher said. "Another one." "Ah, ah," he growled. "Find birdies, I'm going to eat you. Hey, find birdies, I'm going to eat you. You are going to get electrocuted." Christopher noticed a bird sitting on an electric wire. Die, he yelled. His mother told him the birds were fine on the wire. However, Christopher continued, Hey, flying birdies, I'm going to eat you. You are going to get electrocuted and die. Christopher's verbal aggression towards birds may have been influenced by the schemes of his aggressive video games he plays at home. Neither did Christopher disembark off his bike, which prevented direct physical contact between Christopher and other living flora and fauna. This in turn may have reinforced his disattachment towards place and other living beings. Children's agency, made up of past and present experiences, as well as their inherent interests and dispositions, affect how they relate with others in an environmental setting. Findings from my research show how a child who grows up in an Alaska Native village spends much more time playing out. Through play and exploration, these children develop a sense of trust and comfort with their environment and skills to read the landscape. The wearable camera shows 4-year-old Chloe's awareness in her environment. I see a moose, 4-year-old Chloe shouted, pointing to a grassy ridgeline several kilometers away. Lucas stood near to Chloe. I see the moose, he said. Show me, the teacher said. Tito, Chloe called excitedly. I see it walking. Oh, there is a moose right there, straight up that hill, a parent confirmed. See? Chloe yelled. Early childhood is an important time when foundational aspects of a person's identity are formed. Through sustained and meaningful time spent outdoors, children develop competencies to read their landscape and live sustainably in their place. Too much technology and screen time threaten the livelihood of rich and meaningful nature connections. During the wake of COVID-19, when children are forcefully made to partake in school on the screen, it is now more important than ever to get children outdoors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carie. And Kate, may I turn it over to you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to just talk about the epidemiology of COVID, and I was asked to give a couple of remarks on the safety of strengthening the early childhood education outdoors during the current pandemic. So what do we know about young children and COVID based on evidence that has emerged over the last 7 months is that Insight 1, young children are less likely to get infected and less likely to transmit the virus, which makes COVID-19 quite different from influenza, where young children can be important drivers of transmission and can be quite good in passing it on to others. Kids also appear to be less likely to get severe illness from COVID-19. If they do get infected, it's often very mild and often without any symptoms at all. Insight number 2, transmission in outdoor settings is dramatically lower than transmission in indoor settings. There have been very, if any, outbreaks associated with parks or playgrounds that have stayed open. The protests that have taken place outside have also not been linked to large clusters of subsequent infections and community transmission as well. So putting just these two insights together, young children in outdoor settings from COVID-19 perspective is certainly a very low risk environment. But I also wanted to highlight another element and an added benefit of that, that is not just focusing on children. With recent school reopenings, one of the concerns that has been brought forward is around the risk to staff and to teachers. While the outdoor setting certainly provides an environment where it's a lower risk to adults too. What's often not communicated is that in daycare, preschool, and elementary school settings, the highest risk of infection to teachers is actually from other teachers, not from children. And in outdoor setting, that certainly makes it a lot easier to maintain the physical distance. The risk of infection is reduced, so it has the benefit of being in a low risk environment, not just for children, but also for adults as well. It looked a lot longer when I wrote it out, but I realized I'm quite spot on. But perhaps depending on what the questions from the audience are, I'm certainly happy to speak to more of the epidemiology and what the evidence says.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Kate. Now I'd like to go across the panelists again and ask what, in a very short, just 2 minutes, what meaningful idea did you hear emerging while you were listening across the other speakers? So ideas that really struck you as you were listening. And you might be able to hear the rain pouring down here in Victoria as I'm speaking to you. Maybe I'll start with you again, Henry. Or sorry, may I ask, I started with you, Helen, I apologize. Henry, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I was certainly struck by, we're all in this together in terms of COVID. And it is a tragedy, but equally there are opportunities for us to realize. And for outdoor play, we certainly allowed the forest kindergartens to open before mainstream nurseries because of that lower risk. And when lockdown first happened, it was really interesting. I heard, Dr. Stanwick's point about the small number of, that low increase in exercise. But what I was struck by in Scotland was seeing families outdoors who you'd never normally see, and children being able to explore nature with their families in a way that was new to me. Children really enjoying spending a lot more time with dads. And when we're recognizing that outdoors is much less risk and children are safe, much safer, playing outdoors with other children, what a great opportunity this is to mainstream outdoor play. And what we're trying to do in Scotland as part of the nursery expansion is to encourage all nurseries to spend a certain proportion of their time outdoors, and not just for that outdoor experience to be in the kindergarten yard or the outdoor play space that's been approved, but to go outside and explore nature, to find out where their local nature patches are and to make the most of that with children. And I think there are huge opportunities for the outdoor play movement and for kindergartens to expand their outdoor provision under this COVID situation we're all in.
Thanks so much, Henry. Helen, what meaningful insight did you hear?
Thanks, I really enjoyed listening to the other speakers. A point that I wanted to pick up on was Carrie's description of children and talking about that if they have that exposure to nature and that time outdoors when they're young, how that affects their development, their understanding and their relationship with nature as they grow. And the other major crisis that we all face is, of course, looking after our environment, global warming, etc. And I think if we want children to grow up ready to protect the planet and to make good choices about whether they drive a car or whether they get on a bike, about whether they recycle or not, then we need children to feel connected to the land and to nature. And to do that, they need to spend time outdoors and in nature when they're young. So I think that's an added benefit that is beyond the focus today, but is hugely important and has somewhat taken a little bit of a back seat because of the urgency of COVID. But long term, we face huge challenges in terms of the climate. And if we can help ensure that the next generation grow up ready to protect it, then that would be good work done, I think.
Thank you very much, Helen. Kate, may I go over to you?
Of course. So as I was listening, what really struck me is it's a very rare situation where you have the risk and benefit ratio to be so well aligned, in a sense that there are so many benefits that have been well outlined by other speakers. And it's also very well aligned with what the public health recommendations will be in the current environment of the pandemic. As we know, kind of taking a step back, when the public health measures were instituted in many countries around the world in spring of this year, there have been wide-reaching unintended consequences as a result of those measures. So we accomplished one goal, but it was at the cost of other impact. Versus when it comes to early childhood education outdoors, it's very well aligned with what we know about COVID, what the risk of transmission is, which makes it a very safe environment, as well as a very rich environment for children and staff.
Thank you. And Carie.
Thank you. So as I've listened to the panelists and the introductions this morning, something I've been pondering on quite a bit is I'm a mother of 4 children, young children, and ranging from 12 to 4 years old. And my children here in Fairbanks attend an outdoor environmental education emphasis school. But this year, school has drastically changed overnight. And now school begins at 8:30 here and goes until 2:30, and primarily is on the screen for that period of time. With good intentions, the teachers suggest outdoor activities, but what I've observed from my own children is really concerning. Especially my 8-year-old will hide the computer, stick it under her bed at night. I'll wake up and she's playing video games, and she's become overly anxious with this device. And so I guess my comments, I'm really pondering on this, even though I signed up for an outdoor school. Now we're sort of in this other structure, and I feel I don't know how it is elsewhere, but here in Alaska, I think that there's a struggle of how do we educate our children right now. And I feel like the default is becoming this, like, let's just put them on the computer without even taking into account the research that shows how that is detrimental to their health and well-being. And so that's just something I'm really thinking about, and I think we really have to find a balance. And how do we, I guess I'm maybe suggesting more questions than answers, but how do we push that insight forward and support teachers and kind of thinking outside of the box when kind of the default mechanism for educating our children now seems to be on the screen? I guess that's a question I have for everyone here.
And could I open that up to the panel? Do any of the panelists have a comment they might like to make in return to Carrie's question?
I'd be happy to say something on it. It's tough, isn't it? I totally feel your pain as a mother of 2 young children as well, who've spent way more time on screens than normal. I think in general, we need to be a little bit careful about making screens the devil. Screens are the bad guy and everything's, the problem is screens. I don't think screens are going to go anywhere. And I think that argument that screens are bad is not going to get us very far. Perhaps what's better is to say, how do we ensure that is balanced with time outdoors? how do we make sure that children spend time outdoors every day, that they spend time physically active? And if they're on the screen from 9 till 2, that's not ideal. That is a lot of time on the screen. But if they're awake for 12 hours, you know, that gives you another 7 hours to be outdoors, to send them outdoors, to let them play outdoors, to, you know, obviously depending on their age and things. But yeah, so I think for me as a mum and as a psychologist, I think, you know, we're kind of stuck with this to some extent. And I just try as much as possible to ensure that we're balancing that with time outdoors and physical activity. And the downtime from school isn't more screen time.
Yeah, maybe I could just make a very brief comment. I think that having practical guidance for services on how to run safely outdoors under COVID restrictions is very important. And if government agencies can act together to give that approval, because it's very easy to slip back into everything must close. And there are some environments where it will be positive health benefits in that widest sense. And I've been having a look at some of the chat, and in Scotland, we've got issued a lot of government approved guidance for kindergartens reopening in the past couple of months. And, you know, looking at the safe bubbles of children, how to kind of keep children in a group, and to assure people that outdoors, it is okay to say play with sand, to play with water, these practical things that indoors would have a much higher risk. And I think that the practical guidance and making sure that all the regulators, all the people who are involved in early childhood education are on board, I think really helps.
Thank you. Belva, I might turn to you and just see, has a question emerged from the chat that you would like to share? I know that you've been following it, and if it hasn't yet, there are many other questions here.
Yes, hi. We've got quite a few. So we'll start with the first one that was posted in our Q&A box, and it says, for children that may have an ASD diagnosis or are highly sensory driven, that perhaps struggle with larger open spaces outside, group settings, playgrounds, how do we assist those children that struggle with outdoor spaces but need that element of nature in their life? And this came through while Henry was speaking.
Is there a panelist who might like to respond to that?
I can certainly respond. Really important that children have free access to the outdoors, and we've been really encouraging nurseries to return to some of that previous practice of children being able to go outside and to choose to be able to go outside and inside. And for the outdoors not to be completely open, but to have different types of spaces to encourage the children to build dens. And there is a variety of shelters that children can go into and can use, and that they're not just left to it. Certainly some of the initial reaction to everybody wanting more outdoor play is that some practitioners can open the doors and say, right, out you go, and they will watch the children playing. When, of course, what we want and children need is for practitioners to model the outdoor play, to be involved in that, and to be out there with the children, to take their pedagogy outside. And I think it's really important that children with additional needs who maybe struggle with that completely open setting, have some boundaries, have spaces they can go to, and above all, will have practitioners around as well.
It's a great answer.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump to a question that came in earlier, and I might ask it of you, Carie. How might programs forward a land-based approach to early childhood education? How might outdoor programs forward that?
Challenging question. I think to me, when I think about land education, I think about the peoples who are from the land's connection to the place, and that land-based education is going to differ depending on the space and the place. And I think it's so it is a challenging question, because obviously in many places we're sort of a melting pot of peoples from different spaces. And I think something that, I don't know if I'm going to answer the question directly, but something that I've observed is that it's really important that we critically think about children's agency in the process. From my own research, thinking about like what background do I bring to that space, and what background do the children bring to that space. And so as an outsider, oftentimes coming into children, to work with children who have a deep, profound relationship with the land, they are often teaching me. And so being able to take that step back and say, okay, what am I bringing to this situation that perhaps is maybe even be like hindering their relationship with the place? I mean, it's very complex. I'm just going to say one little story. I have a colleague who is Tlingit from Southeast Alaska, and her and I do research together. And we were taking a group of children outdoors, and a child said, I am a killer whale. We're hiking through the forest. She says, I am a killer whale. And Angie, my friend, my colleague, is holding her hand, and her and Angie were having this conversation. And my immediate reaction was, oh, cute. She's playing make-believe in nature, and that's wonderful, you know. But Angie understood it from that cultural implication of that's who she is. That's her crest, that's her identity. And so I think that it becomes, so back to that land education piece, it becomes listening to that child, understanding and being open to kind of questioning your own background and understanding. And maybe you don't always know. So we have to pay really close attention to those micro interactions and the meaning that they embed. Because if I were just to discount it, just play and make believe, that's actually offensive to that child's identity development. So I don't know if I'm kind of raising more questions rather than, but it's complex. It's complex.
Thank you, Carie. Kate, I was wondering when you were preparing your short introduction, if there were other epidemiological studies that you really wanted to include, but you didn't have time for. Were there other things that you wanted to draw from?
Well, I was, one of the first questions that was posed to the panel actually made me think of a couple practical benefits that I thought would be worth highlighting. A lot of cognitive benefits were highlighted about outdoor education, but I wanted to highlight a couple that were COVID-related practical benefits. And one is that for children who need more attention around language development, Some of the mandatory masking requirements in jurisdictions certainly pose a problem. And I know that speech language pathologists have been struggling to find masks that are clear, but it's often, fogs up and is very difficult. But you really, the children really need to see the mouth movements and just to help with that development. And in outdoor setting, it's certainly much easier to maintain that distance, and it may take away that need for masking. I want to be careful here as I may, there's still, other public health measures would need to be followed, but it's certainly that added benefit, especially for younger kids in language development is an important consideration, because I know that it's been one of those difficulties in the education system about implementing it in the current pandemic situation. And the other benefit is the cleaning requirements. By definition, there are fewer surfaces to clean, so it's much less resource intensive as well for following COVID protocols and what's necessary to be done. So those were, I just thought might be, worth highlighting as well, in addition to the cognitive and emotional and mental benefits.
Thank you so much. Henry, can I ask of you, this is a question that came in earlier, how can we make our approach to early childhood education more child-centric and less about managing adult fears?
I think that it's important to be evidence-based and to address some of the understandable fears that are around in terms of children's risk to children, the rate of accidents. And very interesting to look at the international research around the relative risks to children and to take a holistic view of that, in that some of the assumptions that are made about children having very serious harm come to them through accidents outdoors doesn't actually stand up when you look at the evidence. And when we looked in Scotland in terms of when there were serious accidents in kindergarten, much more likely to be indoors than outdoors. The rate of accidents was very low. And I know we've got a different system, but the fears of parents suing providers was not founded in terms of the actual number of cases of that. So I think it's really important to be evidence-based when we're looking at the relative risks to children and to put that into a wider context. Often the risk of, say, the screen-based activity is not accounted for in the same way when accidents and harm in preschool looked at.
Thank you. Belva, can I turn to you? Do you have another question?
I'm just going to go sort of incrementally down the list in order. So, hi everyone, thanks for this. Love to see Ontario Public Health and Licensing include the need to spend more / increase percentage of time outdoors and in nature as a part of the recommendations, many rules and regulations linked to reopening childcare centers. Lots of advocacy to be done. Is anything being done in BC related to this and reopening rules and regulations and protocols? So is there any advocacy being done in BC related to this reopening rules?
And in this case, I might ask if anyone on the organizing committee would like to answer that question.
Well, I could say a little bit. I think one of our goals really of trying to bring this discussion forward is that I think And what I'm hearing from everybody is that we need to be dealing with this and talking about this together. This is something that I think here in BC, we're wondering how we can move forward with. And so that's why we've gathered these voices. So I think it's an ongoing discussion, and hopefully this is the beginning of thinking about some of these ideas around, how do we move forward to help make these programs be something that are not only outdoors and we've thought through them, but also they reflect our Canadian perspective around this as well. What does it mean to be in the place that we are? And reflecting the diversity that we have as well. So not sure that that completely answers it, but I think we're in the midst of it.
Thank you so much, Enid. Belva, is there maybe one more question? You can look right through the list and see if one really jumps out for you.
I do. I have one right here. We all know that there's a difference between outdoor education and outdoor learning. Those are put in quotes. Can you speak to these differences? Previously, I've heard these terms used interchangeably, and I think this is a wonderful delineation to make in this conversation.
Again, is there a panelist who would like to respond to that?
I'm happy just to say a few words about that. I think that the best learning that we are coming across are those practitioners that are not sticking to a prescribed curriculum and prescribed activities outdoors, but can work with the children's natural curiosity and can follow up and develop on what the children are finding in nature, and for that to be quite an organic thing and not pre-planned too much. Now, it's easy as said than done to move from very prescriptive expectations in terms of curriculum to that kind of approach. But those practitioners who have had a lot of experience of working with children in a child-centered way, of making the most of play and seeing that children's play fits a lot of the educational inputs that are needed, are the ones that are able to operate at that, I would say, a high level alongside the children.
Helen, could I ask you if you wanted to elaborate on some of that? I'm wondering from the childhood, psychological studies, if there's something to be added.
So I think there's a difference between children being outdoors all day and being immersed in that outdoor environment and having outdoor education versus some outdoor learning which happens as part of their school day. So if they're they're being educated in quite a traditional way in a building and they're taken out, or let's go and do 15 minutes and we'll collect leaves or something and then we'll come back in, and that it's great if they're doing that, and that's much better than being inside all day, but that's a very different experience for a young child than being outdoors all of the day or most of the day and being in a childcare setting where there really are no significant buildings for them to be inside. And when we look at the literature on nature connectedness, it's that prolonged time in nature that really builds that connectedness to nature. So some access to being outdoors and being in nature is better than none. And I did see in one of the questions somebody had raised, what do you do if you don't live somewhere, or your childcare environment doesn't offer some beautiful outdoor space? And that's the case in many places around the world. And and for those schools and those environments, get children outdoors as much as you can, spend as much time as possible in nature, but we realise it's not the same for everybody. But this initiative and the idea of ensuring that children can access childcare where they are outdoors all day is fantastic, and will, I think, have different additional benefits beyond just popping outdoors to do a bit of outdoor learning and then going back into the classroom.
Thank you so much. What I'd like to do now is just take 2 minutes from each panelist for you to share, 1 or 2 important considerations that you really would want to sort of highlight to help BC move forward with licensing outdoor early childhood education now. And this time I'm going to give you a choice. Who would like to go first?
This is Carie. I would like to just build off of what both Henry and Helen were saying about letting children take the lead. And I think that's kind of the takeaway that I'd like to share, is that whole idea is that we shouldn't make with children's agency and children taking the lead, as educators taking a step back and listening and learning from the children, but also not making assumptions that all children are at the same place, especially if you're an educator and you have a group of children, then to not make the assumption that all the children are enjoying this activity, for instance, right? But to so some of the work that I do around children's environmental identity development is the recognition of where children are in their progression of their environmental identity. And so that as an educator, we can kind of look at where each individual child is and cater the need to develop a healthy environmental identity and meet them where they are at. And so I think that's the takeaway that I'd like to say, is that just really tuning in to children, and when we tune into their agency, they teach us so much more than we can teach them. Their ideas are often, I mean, if you go outside with a kid and you watch what they do and you listen and learn from them, their ideas are so profound. And so, but then we ask the question, how can we support them, and how can we move this towards a healthy identity formation with the natural world? And so that's what I would like to say as a strong point. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I ask Kate?
Sure. A couple of things I haven't mentioned that I think is also important to mention, kind of in putting forward business cases or protocols or what have you, relevant documentation. As the evidence to support this, this movement, especially regarding COVID risks, is assembled, it's important to keep in mind there's a very strong age gradient when it comes to COVID in terms of children's susceptibility to the virus and also ability to transmit. So pulling all children together is not epidemiologically correct. And younger children are different from older children, who tend to be much more like adults in terms of their ability to transmit the virus. So that's just an important to keep in mind, especially, we hear often about school outbreak. Well, it makes a big difference. Is it a high school? Was it outbreak in staff as opposed to children? And did the infection actually occur in the school setting, or did it occur in the community and the person happens to work at school? So it's just important to keep that in mind and reference in studies, because it's certainly, I've seen instances where it's been misinterpreted. So everything I said earlier today around what do we know about transmission potential and risk to adults, and certainly was thinking when it comes to younger children who really don't seem to be the important drivers of epidemic. And also, of course, I would not be a good public health professional if I did not note that even though the outdoor environment is a much lower risk setting, it would still be important to include and follow other public health measures. Although rare, we know that there are some instances of super spreading events. It appears that some individuals tend to be much more effective in spreading COVID, even though most people are not. So what that means is that, you know, maintaining physical distance wherever possible, wearing masks, especially for adults when if there's a situation of prolonged close contact, and of course washing hands. That doesn't go away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Henry, could I ask you?
Quite easy for the growth in outdoor play to be focused entirely on these specialist forest kindergartens, the ones that are where the children are outdoors all day and there isn't a nursery building. But in some ways that would be to miss the point, in that many of the, you know, the parents and the demographic using these services will already be converts, and the children will already be spending quite a bit of time outdoors. And yes, there's absolutely a story to be told about the regulations allowing forest kindergartens. But ultimately, in terms of all the children attending all our preschool services, we want all services to develop and become much more outdoor. And I've got a lot of guidance that I can share where essentially we're sharing the practice for mainstream nurseries of how to have the children outdoors much more, and to set expectations that every child is able to choose to go outside during periods of the day, that every child goes outside every day, that every child has a regular opportunity to explore themselves a completely natural environment. And I think that it does require some real practical guidance to shift the culture of early learning in childcare. And, you know, we've got loads of stuff in Scotland that I'm only too happy to share with you.
Thank you for your generosity, Henry. Appreciate it. Helen.
So I think Henry was talking about how he noticed during lockdown so many more families outside exploring their local area. And that really resonated with me because my experience was exactly the same. I'd be interested to know whether the same is true in Canada. But, you know, just anecdotally, I had neighbours who had never been to the local woods that are about 5 minutes walk from our house, had never taken their children there until COVID-19 happened. And these woods that were always empty and peaceful and beautiful suddenly were full of people. But it was wonderful to see all these people discovering the environment immediately surrounding where they live, rather than getting in the car and driving for an hour to go to Legoland or to go into London, or, you know, people were going by foot or by bike around their local neighbourhoods. And there's research from the UK that shows on average children were spending more time playing outdoors during lockdown, also more time on screens, which relates to my earlier point that these things aren't necessarily more of one means less of the other. And I had a sense during that time of how do we harness this? This feels like a really important moment in time. People have stopped and realised the benefits of spending time outside as a family, of connecting with the environment that you live in. And I feel the same is true for education, you know, that we're thinking about, because of this situation we find ourselves in, actually children are better off in terms of the risk from COVID outdoors. And so it really feels to me like we have an opportunity right now, a silver lining, if you like, of this awful situation that we found ourselves in all around the world, to recognise the benefits of being outdoors for everybody, but for children in particular. The challenge now, I think, is how do we keep hold of that? And how do we make sure that we benefit from that in the long term, rather than just allowing ourselves to slip back to where we were before? So this initiative is a great example of taking this moment and thinking, how do we take the learning that we've had right now in this specific situation to ensure that children benefit from it in the long term.
Helen, I'll just jump in quickly and confirm that in Canada, certainly data shows that there's been increased use of outdoors. This data comes from different sectors. Google Mobility would be one where you can see the use of parks has definitely increased. Retail sales of outdoor related accessories and certainly, and bike shops. They have had the busiest season yet. It's almost been impossible to get a bike. And and you've been seeing old bikes come out of garages and getting fixed because you couldn't get a new bike. So there's certainly been an uptake in active transportation and spending time in parks. And so many of the multiple data sources certainly point to that.
Yeah.
But like as you mentioned, also increase in screen time. We also see that reported on the surveys as well.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting.
Thank you all. And perhaps in the history of panels, we actually concluded with a moment, 1 minute be shorter than we needed to. And so that gives us time for Belva to ask one more question. Go ahead, Belva.
Thank you. This is for Henry and Mathias. Would you be able to speak to how Scotland's government funding invests on educators and how and if they are formed and informed in pedagogical practices that are based or at least inspired in outdoor education? Also, what type of funding is provided to building shelters to support ECE outdoors, especially during the winter? And that is the last question in the Q&A if you want to read it.
There's a lot of government funding going into the expansion of nursery education. And that funding is being made available not just to public authorities, but also private nurseries, kindergartens run by charities. So it's available to all. And part and parcel of that is that services need to meet a national standard. And the national standard, as I was saying earlier, is quite specific in terms of the experience of children, in terms of outdoor play. And so the expansion of nursery education, the funding of nursery education goes hand in hand with outdoor play expectation. And in terms of the training of practitioners, we're moving much more to degree level, very much behind the times in terms of the rest of European practice, and enhancing the status, the pay, the qualifications of staff. But we've got a long way to go in that regard. But certainly the amount of forest school training that is going on in our sector has been really heartening. Our Forestry Commission has been part and parcel of that. And that most curriculums now, in terms of the educators, have really taken on board that outdoor aspect of the curriculum.
Thank you so much, Henry. And with that, may I just say a really large thank you to our panelists for taking the time, coming in at odd hours of the night, and all of those sorts of things to be with us here. I'll note that the big rainstorm has now turned into sunshine, just as we're concluding, and I'd like to turn it over now to Enid for closing remarks from the organizing committee.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you to everyone, because I think we've begun a conversation that can help us move forward in our thinking and planning about getting children outdoors. And I agree, Henry, it's more than just having all day outdoor programs, but making sure that all children have access to time outside, because we are embedded in this world and it has much to offer us and children. And I would like to thank the panelists for, well, so many things, but Henry, your suggestion about moving licensing from policing to encouragement, and Helen speaking of the benefits of nature and the outdoors to children's well-being. and Carie about a strong voice for children's agency and engagement in the natural world, and Kate really giving us, you know, clear messages about how the virus works. I mean, really multiple perspectives coming together, which is really very exciting. And it really makes us have quite a rich conversation, I think. You know, early childhood is a crossroads of disciplines, health, well-being, learning. It's multifaceted. So one of the things that I thought was that Morgan raised the point about Nutsumat, which is learning and gathering together. And I think we are in this together on multiple levels. And, you know, we're keeping each other safe. We're caring for the land, water, and air, and engaging in the place where we live. And hopefully government agencies working together. So thank you for all the important points raised, giving us further questions and food for thought. And thank you, Ellen, for keeping us on track. So we're going to continue our learning and thinking about advancing ECE outdoors next week, October 1st, and we'll hear about paths to ECE outdoors with diverse speakers speaking about some of the ways early childhood has happened in other areas and related issues. And I think in the chat, the link to where the recording of this session will be was posted. So I want to thank everyone, both on the screen and behind it, because it's been a team effort, believe me. And we've had many little practices and glitches to work through. We are recording these sessions, so and we also hope to make them available as podcasts, so you can take them on your walks outside. So thank you to everyone who's participated, because this is the way to begin a conversation, is to, you know, gather together to think about things. If you have questions that arose or didn't get answered, please send them in so that we can ask them next week. And I just was thinking about how in March, I watched the birds build their nests, and then they fed their young. And now I'm watching some of them fly off to other places. And there was comfort for me in that rhythm. So I'm hoping each of you can find some peaceful rhythms in your place. And see you next week. Thank you.